Brick Township has traveled a long, hard road since the dark days of the scandal that drove longtime Mayor Joe Scarpelli from office. Since then, one Republican and one Democrat have brought the township through the worst of the superstorm troubles. On November 7th, the incumbent seeks another term. He has 3 challengers, a Republican and 2 independents, one of whom you're about to meet right now. Meet Reverend Robert Canfield. He coalesced the concerns he shares with the supporters into the Take Back Brick campaign, specifically our ongoing struggle against heroin addiction, the forces that perpetuate it, tax stabilization through cost efficiencies, and neighborhood rejuvenation, holding delinquent property owners accountable. You can see all his views at takebackbrick.com. Welcome in, Reverend. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
First question, and I have to ask this. You're a man of the cloth.
Yes.
You deal in absolute truths. It's not always that politics is a dirty business. What is driving you into this?
Secretly, I've always wanted to be in politics. I remember back in high school, and if any of my teachers are watching, they'll laugh at this point. I always used to go up to the podium and would stand there in front of the classroom, and the running joke was always I'd run for president. Well, I'm not doing that, but I've always had a desire to help people, obviously, by the field of work I've chosen, being a reverend. My whole goal is help people, and help people.
You're going for a master's in divinity.
Yes.
But to this point, this is your entry into the political sphere.
Correct.
Any trepidation?
I'm not sure what that means.
Are you afraid of anything?
Oh, sorry, a little tired today. Not really. I mean, I don't usually get afraid until I'm staring it right in the face and realizing what I got myself into. So, not yet. Not yet.
Should be pointed out that he's not just known in Brick. The Reverend's guided spiritual journeys there and in Lakewood, Toms River, and Tinton Falls, just to name a few. But getting to your agenda, and we should get to that. Your first thing is the heroin issue and the prescription med issue. Now, you propose drying up the market for drugs by cutting off the potential supply from pushers, the buyers, separating them from the pushers. How would you go about that?
So there's a couple different routes that we're looking to take. The first is if you cut the demand, there won't be a supply. How do we get people in addiction the help they need to get away from the drugs? This past Monday, we had an event at one of our churches in Point Pleasant where Mr. Coronado, the prosecutor, was there and telling about the ideas that the county are doing. Basically, I'd want to partner with the county, piggyback off what they're doing, and do our best to come together and think what are some other creative methods that we can do to get people help that they need. Even though I know the struggles, how many beds we have, all the insurance issues, what are some ways we can work around that to really get something going? And of course, this is going to be a lot longer than I would be in office, but at least getting it started in the right direction.
Right now, the State Attorney General's office has the State Attorney General's office has a lawsuit, and Brick Township is party to a class action suit involving the manufacturers. If that's successful, let's say you're mayor and it's successful, and Brick Township gets a certain percentage of that settlement, what would you do with it?
Being at the council meeting with that, where, people were asking, what would I do specifically? I would put it into a fund that we're going to use specifically for programs or ideas, of course, vet them properly, of how we can help people. If that's through reputable rehabs that are not just for-profit, fly-by-night, if it's getting scholarships for people to get the help they need after going through a vetting process, whatever it takes.
How do you view the governor's strides in this direction?
Can I say no comment?
You could. You could do that.
I think right now I really don't have a comment to that, to be honest. I don't have a comment. I can't be nice.
Is it better than nothing?
It is better than nothing, but there is a lot better directions that we can take than trying to cut the supply of the opiate pain medications out. There are legitimate needs for them. There are people who legitimately need them that are suffering more than if we found another approach. I mean, taking out the doctor that's writing, oh, you have a toothache, here's 250 Vicodin. Well, yeah, that needs to be an issue. But people who are on actual pain management regimens are being affected by this. And that, I think, is an unintended consequence that could cause more problems later on.
We've learned that a lot of the street dealers get their business from people who had prescription opiates and could no longer afford them. What are your views on opioid-free alternatives?
I think we should look into a lot of them. I know personally I don't use any of them. I actually found for myself that when I had my wisdom teeth out, Motrin did better than the Percocet they gave me. There are different alternatives. We're seeing physical therapy rising up. Being someone who went through that myself, that helped me with chronic pain I had. Chiropractic visits helped with that. Different alternatives like that, and I think that we need to invest more in these as well. Find another way to manage the pain.
Reverend Canfield, let's move to the interior of Town Hall. You're pretty bald about accusing the Ducey administration of a spendthrift attitude, and you kind of date it all the way back to the Acropolis years and beyond. Yeah, it's kind of a stretch without going through the actual budget page by page. So there are a number of immutable fixed costs: police, civil service, union issues. So how do you go about establishing that money is being spent inefficiently?
I don't think I was necessarily aiming for inefficient. The one highlight of my plan was the reserve for uncollected taxes. Every township has that, no matter where you are. And that fund is basically you're paying your taxes every quarter, every year. Your taxes are paid by November 11th. November 1st, you have till the 11th for the grace period. Me, on the other hand, I decide not to pay mine that year, let's say. The way that RUT works, the reserve for uncollected taxes, is you're paying for me who's not paying. So with this, it's not bad spending per se. The town's allowed to do it. They have an algorithm that's mandated by the state that they use to come to this number, and right now ours is significantly high. The best way to do that and free up a good $6 million of our budget is by simply moving the tax sale from standard, which is a calendar year following, to the same calendar year or accelerated. So with that, we'd be able to free up $6 million to either return as a tax break or use to prevent the taxes from rising due to costs, such as raises.
Now, town's been coping with a revenue gap in taxes since the superstorm. Are you satisfied with the progress in which it's being closed?
I think we're doing pretty decently right now with that. Obviously, there's still some that are still coming online. I know there's a lot across from me that was abandoned until this last year. They finally tore it down and are finally building something new on it. So I think we're getting closer and closer. We just have to wait for the rest of these properties to come back onto the rolls. Right.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, because Brick's had an ordinance since 2014 about taking abandoned properties and giving it a certain amount of time, and if nobody's answering to it, then we tear it down and find another way back onto the tax rolls. But you want to hold building owners accountable. You want to take it a little step further. What's your plan?
Well, that was actually an old plan. I'm not sure why that was still on the website. I must not have seen it. The original plan was if a landlord lets it sit, and I'm not talking like I'm actively searching to get a tenant and nobody wants it. I'm saying like, okay, if I let it get to a certain level and then reassess it, the taxes are cheaper. It's the typical, I forget what they called it, but you basically let the property sit and sit and sit, and then there's a benefit to doing that. This was more what that was going for, not people who are, oh, our tenant moved out a year and a half ago and nobody wants the space. That type of tenant would not have been affected by this because they're searching, they're seeking. It's not their fault that somebody doesn't want to come in. So this would be more for people who are intentionally allowing their space to decline in value to get a benefit in the end from it.
And how would you rectify that?
Basically keeping code enforcement on them. We have different laws. You can't have trash all over the place. One gas station near my house actually is abandoned for the longest time. And people were complaining constantly there's a whole bunch of garbage in the back of the property that nobody's been cleaning. Well, that's the landlord's responsibility. That wasn't being done. So finally somebody sent code enforcement out, and code enforcement finally took care of it. So making sure that we're a little more proactive with things like that the property's being kept decently, that it's not being decrepit, that there's not trash sploon everywhere. So being a little more proactive with these properties, making sure that they're up to code.
You're very, another thing about Town Hall and everybody in it is that you have very exacting standards about who works there. You want to hold people accountable there too. What's your idea on that?
Well, I know in my job, if I do certain things, I would get talked to. People have complained to me that we're seeing public works sitting at the same place for hours and hours and hours, just hanging out at the coffee shop, whatever. You know, I understand they get like an hour break, union breaks, whatever it is, but to be at the same place for multiple hours, behaviors like that, if I did at my job, well, I wouldn't have a job. And my boss would yell at me. If people are there to do a job, we need to make sure that they're doing their job within reason, of course, but holding them to a standard saying, listen, you're here to do this job. Make sure it's done. Get it done in a timely manner. Again, going back to being proactive. All the time, if you watch the Facebook Lives, there's complaints about backed up storm drains. There's different areas of town that haven't been paved properly. There's all sorts of other issues that are going unnoticed. And my question, of course, to that is why? So forcing people to be more proactive, go out and check. Have somebody check what's going on. Hey, guys, let's go clean this out. Make sure it's all clean and ready to go. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I want to ask you about another component on your page, and it seemed to be the most incendiary one, which was labeled the Lakewood Invasion. We need to talk about that a little bit. At this very moment, there's an action filed by the U.S. Attorney, I believe it is, against the town of Mahwah, which set up basically ordinances that run afoul of the law in order to segment away the population coming in from across the border in New York State by keeping them out of public parks and all that. So what are you referring to with the Lakewood Invasion? Let's get specific about this, and why is it a concern for you?
A lot of people have talked to me about it, and that's really why it's a concern for me. People are constantly saying we don't want to end up like another Lakewood. where the traffic is horrible. I mean, traffic's already bad in Brick, but imagine having 100,000 more people, or 100,000 population, I guess, is what I'm trying to say with that. Imagine how bad the roads would be. People don't want to see neighborhoods become decrepit like they had been. People don't want to see their town go in that type of direction. Now, of course, I understand, in my field, there's a very fine line between law and discrimination. And I'm not discriminating against anybody. If this were problems with people from Pennsylvania coming over and doing something, I would do the same thing. The township now requires you to have a permit if you have over 15 people at township parks, which is a good step. We just need to make sure that no matter who it is, if it's you guys here at the studio want to have a party there and you don't have a permit, you should get the same fine as anybody else. And it's not intended to discriminate against any certain group. It's there to basically say, listen, we have the way we're set up. We have our laws. We have our respect for each other. If you're going to come in and you're not going to follow them, there are consequences.
Are you concerned about adding payroll to code enforcement just to keep after illegal conversions and keep after... You're going to get some spillover. Lakewood's right next to Brick. That's a nice town. Let's move there. There's no more room in Lakewood. There seems to be no way around that. And Brick is already very populated and pretty much built out. So you're going to have difficulties of that nature. Are you prepared for that?
I'm getting there. I haven't thought through all the exact specifics with it, but I know, as you just said, code enforcement is going to have to be stepped up a little. We're going to have to make sure that people are not intentionally violating our code, our plans. If it's set as a residential zone, single-family detached, I believe Brick now has an ordinance. It's either schools are not allowed in residential zones. I don't know if that covers houses of worship either. So not being able to build a house of worship, regardless who you are, if you're a Buddhist monk, if you're Catholic, if you're Protestant, whatever you are, you cannot build a school or house of worship in a residential zone. You have to go commercial or one of the other zones.
Quality of life is important to you. How else do you view it outside of the housing issue and the population issue? What is the most important component of quality of life in Brick that you want to either build or preserve?
One thing with quality of life is our parks. Some of the playgrounds are not used as much, but some of the bigger parks like Windward, Lake Riviera Park are used frequently by people. So making sure that we can get those improved if we need to, making them, keeping them clean, keeping them safe. There have been issues. I know my aunt told me once that they found drugs at one of the parks, and they called and nothing was done about it. So making sure that these places are safe for our kids, for our families, to be able to use not just now, but for generations to come. So our parks, I think, are some of the big things that are really good for the people, our people.
Let's say you're Mayor Canfield and you're an independent. Do you stay independent? And does that affect your relationship to the township council?
I would stay as an independent, and right now, from what I sense, the council and I are on good terms. Obviously, you've seen by the campaign, I don't intentionally go up and start being the angry young man of that Billy Joel song. I don't yell at people. I don't call them out in settings like that. I'm polite, I'm respectful, and I've told at least the business administrator, probably others, that I have respect for these people. I am not here, I do not know better than anyone else. I'm simply here to throw out other ideas and see what we can do. So I think right now our relationship is good with the council, and I really don't foresee this being an issue later on, because I believe that beyond politics we can work together as people.
And one final question. How do you reconcile your vocation with this occupation?
Well, again, as I told, I believe it was the council president, I am a denominational minister, so it's really no different. Being part of a group like I am, you have politics regardless of where you go. So for me to reconcile it, for me personally, I see it as an opportunity to help people, to serve people, and that's basically what I do as a minister anyway, is help, teach, mentor, serve people the best I can. So basically it just translates into how do you do it in a political sense. Helping people, listening to their concerns, and doing the best you can to rectify what their concerns are.
Reverend Robert Canfield, seeking your vote way out on the outside on row E if you go into the ballot booth in his quest to be the next mayor of Brick Township. Thank you for watching, and please vote with your brain and with your heart.